We're set for one of the most important weeks of the year to come for the overall market, with the Fed set to deliver its latest decision on interest rates coming up this Wednesday. Jerome Powell in a tough spot with the CPI number last week still showing 6% inflation, but also regional banks being stretched to beyond their breaking point. A few notable earnings names, meanwhile, to come this week as well, with retail favorite GameStop set to report earnings, Nike's coming through, Foot Locker, and Pinduoduo. It's another edition of your bite-sized weekly market prep, the week ahead preview right now. Monday kicks off with a look to earnings pre-market to set the tone for the session, with the likes of Chinese e-commerce site PDD set to come through with its latest report. It will be the platform's first post-reopening earnings report and is expected to focus on the post-pandemic economy, the mood among regulators over in China, and hype over all things ChatGPT. Remember Baidu with a flop in theirs last week. We'll check out PDD pre-market. Foot Locker, meanwhile, also on the docket as we're set for the sporting goods retailer's latest report. Most analysts are expecting a beat from the company, with the overall retail economy remaining strong. Remember, just last week, retail sales data from last month came in line with expectations, showing a slight decline month over month for overall sector activity. Let's go on to Tuesday. It'll be a jam-packed session with economic data, earnings, and investor events highlighting the day. Pre-market, first off to start, we'll be watching clean energy name Canadian Solar, CSIQ, and also Tencent Music, TME, for earnings. Most analysts are expecting a positive report from the Chinese media giant. Goldman Sachs, meanwhile, with a positive note recently on the stock, upgrading TME to neutral from sell, also increased their price target to $8 from $5. TME is coming off 4 straight quarters of slight beats and is expected to continue that trend. 10 a.m. then we'll see the latest reading on existing home sales for February come through after the close. Meanwhile, retail favorite GME is set to report earnings. As of last week, the stock is now negative for 2023, reversing, let's be honest, a pretty impressive 50% rally. Most analysts are expecting still a wider loss to come through once again this time for the video game retailer. Tuesday during the session then we'll watch shares of Adobe. The company recently announced an investor Q&A that will happen at its Adobe Summit in Las Vegas coming up this week. The event is set to take place starting at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Also happening at 2:30 Eastern will be the Bank of America Electronic Payments Symposium. Both SoFi and Affirm are scheduled to present at that event, so busy afternoon coming up on Tuesday. All right, let's get right on to Wednesday, because it's the biggest day of the week by far, with the latest Fed decision on interest rates set to come through from Fed Chair Powell. And of course, the press conference to follow at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, with the recent failure of multiple well-established regional banks that were unable to cope with the current high interest rate environment. The probability of a smaller hike coming from the Fed has skyrocketed over the past week or so. At one point, it was a 50-50 toss-up whether we were going to get any rate hike whatsoever. Fed Chair Powell is in a tough spot, forced to weigh the continued pressure being put on the banking sector, and specifically the smaller regional banks that have seen their stocks decimated in recent trading days. These banks rely heavily on VC funding, tech, and small business loans to operate in a world that has been in a coma, let's be honest, since the Fed began raising rates going back a year ago just last week. Last week we saw the final 2 important data points that the Fed will consider on the inflation front as well. Both, however, were overshadowed by the ongoing banking crisis. The latest CPI print was essentially in line with expectations, but still showing inflation's at 6% year over year. PPI data, meanwhile, showed an unexpected decline in the price producers pay for the first significant move for an inflationary data point to the downside. The latest data from the CME Fed Funds tool, meanwhile, essentially again showing a 50-50 toss-up between just a quarter-point hike coming from the Fed and what is to be a surprise pause altogether. Remember, 2 p.m. Eastern, we'll get the rate decision, and then just after that to follow at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, we'll watch the press conference with Jerome Powell for any indications of a change in direction coming from the Fed on its continued inflation battle. All right, let's move on to Thursday. That'll bring another full slate of economic data starting in the pre-market at 8:30 with building permits issued for February. We'll get initial jobless claims. The Chicago Fed National Activity Index then comes through at 10. New home sales for February also at 10 o'clock. The only notable earnings name pre-market will be GIS, General Mills. The consumer staples name is expected to beat once again with their latest earnings report, taking advantage of higher prices in the industry. Most analysts still maintain a buy rating on the stock heading into this earnings. Starbucks on watch as well. The stock could be volatile throughout the session as the company is set to host its annual shareholder meeting. That'll get started around 1 p.m. Eastern for the Seattle-based company. And just like that, it's Friday already. Let's close out the week. Just one earnings name on watch. Pre-market Friday with retail favorite and recent runner EXPR slated to come through with its latest report. Focus will then shift to 9:45 a.m. Eastern. We'll get the 9:45 S&P Global Composite and Services PMI number for March. In February, this number showed the activity rebounded to an 8-month high, with the index improving to 50.5 last month, up from 47.2 in the prior month. We're set for another monster week in store for the market. As always, we'll bring you all the action live as it happens daily on TraderTV.Live.